Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts, Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in the space. This week, it's episode 18 of season 3. We're going to have a chat around Windows 365, a subscription based VDI service that provides and automates the provisioning of cloud PCs for your end users. Hey, Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How about you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, ready to jump into some VDI goodness with Windows 365. Yeah, looking forward to this one because from what I know of Windows 365, it can be quite a efficient way to deploy cloud machines. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's kind of I guess it's kind of a sister or brother to Azure Virtual Desktop.
Yeah,
Some form.
exactly. Yeah, and we recently did an episode, didn't we, on AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop? Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, we did.
How many
I can't
episodes
remember
was
what
that ago?
episode. Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
God, we're on 18. I think it's this season, but
Yeah, so if you do want to know about Azure Virtual Desktop, check out that previous episode that we did. But should we jump straight into it, Al?
yeah, sure.
Okay, so I think it's probably worth starting off. Alan's going to be sort of the subject matter expert. I'm going to fire some questions at him. Hopefully, get as much of his insight and knowledge out as I possibly can. Um, Alan, I think to start off with, if people don't maybe they don't currently use a VDI solution, or maybe they've never seen a VDI solution. Could you just explain at a high level what VDI is and what it aims to achieve?
Yeah, sure. So VDI stands for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, but in essence, it's a remote machine that allows you to access it into run processes or run applications on it. So quite a lot of people might remote desktop onto servers to you know administer their applications on premise, things like that. This is more around having a production or productivity machine that a user uses day to day. With Office 365 on it, running their applications for your end users. So not necessarily for your IT admins, kind of maintaining applications themselves, databases, things like that. This is more around a user jumps onto these machines and then they can run their Outlook and run Office and do their day-to-day job in effect or role on there all day. So some of those benefits for doing that. So there's quite a few. There's one is that you don't have to potentially provide laptops and full-fledged desktops. You might have thin PCs, which are sort of cut down machines, so that they can just jump to these VDI solutions. Um, and Azure Virtual Desktop is one of those sort of solutions, as well as Windows 365, and you've got things like Citrix out there, which is a key provider out there. Another thing is that you might have some sites within your organization that doesn't have very good internet. Maybe only has a 10 megabyte connection, things like that, and they're using maybe they're consuming quite a lot of data. It takes a long time to download or upload that information. This is in effect a possibility or an option to deploy them to remote onto a machine that's maybe in your data center, so it's close to the data, and able to consume it there, where they've got like a full a full-fledged internet connection or a network connection that's directly to the data, so they can run more efficiently without any like lag or just network problems, to be honest, because a remote desktop session can potentially work on an intermittent connection, or it can try to work on an intermittent connection at that point. But yeah, this kind of came out of sort of the other way of doing it is using remote desktop services as another sort of name for this sort of service. But virtual VDIs tend to be personal machines or a pool of machines that is a one-to-one scenario in most cases, rather than it being like multi-session, like we talked about with Azure Virtual Desktop. Um, but yeah, that's kind of a quick overview, I think.
So you mentioned RDS, and Windows 365 is obviously a cloud service. So how would have this been done more traditionally in the past? We're talking about a cloud solution here, but what might people be migrating from, and what might they be currently evaluating against?
So potentially, so this would probably be done on premise uh, with remote desktop services, or Citrix on premise, and that is a bunch of big hosts that then have virtual machines on them. Um, that then you provision as you need, sort of potentially manually, or using something like Virtual Machine Manager, maybe, or the Citrix, or the solution that you're working with doing that automation for you. So I believe that Citrix can do that automatic provisioning on premise for you, kind of thing. Um, but they might be coming from that, or potentially it still could be in the cloud, but still managed as infrastructure. So that could be potentially like Azure Virtual Desktop, where it's a similar solution, but you're managing the virtual machines, um, and or it could be again Citrix in the cloud somewhere, even on Azure, or in any other sort of data center where they support it.
Okay, so we effectively just, and I suppose we'll talk about this with Windows 365, but we're trading the more traditional approach of provisioning hardware, maybe even IaaS with a software vendor on top potentially. That could be RDS from Microsoft, or it could be Citrix um, as well. We're trading that for just a singular cloud service at this point, aren't we?
Yeah, and if you did have it on premise, you'd have to preempt your resource. You have to buy your servers up front. It's not a on demand, or you have to sort of pre-provision it, assuming you're going to need it all, kind of thing. So there's normally a high upfront cost for those sort of projects, especially on premise, to understand what what technology you want to use, or what software RDS solution you want to use, as well as then how much compute you're going to need, and that sort of stuff. And you have to just sort of buy that up front, and hope, not say hope for the best, but hope that you don't need to buy more servers, or you've over provisioned, and then you've not potentially got wastage there.
Yeah, and if I suppose if this is a new service you're bringing into your organization, there could be a time where for that first cycle of hardware, there could be inefficiencies with utilizing that hardware, right? If you spec your hardware for 100 users and you only add them in batches of 10 every month or something like that, you're going to have potentially utilization just sitting there, you know, in inverted commas, wasted until you consume it, right? So, so once you've got that service operation, I suppose once you've got that service inside your business and you're not growing, let's say you've just got a steady number of users, I suppose it's quite simple to from an like an on-prem perspective, just re- refresh that hardware, if that makes sense. But up until that point, there could be a bit of inefficiency.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, maybe your total cost of ownership may take longer to recognize,
Yeah.
if you're taking that stage approach, which you would do in a big deployment like that. You would never go big bang with it all.
Yeah, and I suppose that's quite a simplistic viewpoint as well. I suppose because we'll take it, maybe if we play a devil's advocate, there might be workloads that just simply can't go into the cloud. Maybe they are
Yeah.
cost prohibitive for specific like high consumption or high performance workloads, or the specific hardware that you've got and things like that. So
Or
it's not
regulatory
one's
compliances. Yeah.
yeah, it's not one solution fits all. There's multiple different products that you could potentially utilize, right? Even just within Microsoft.
Yeah.
Okay, so VDIs. I think that was a really good explanation of you know why VDIs are important, what role they play, and some of their use cases. So how does Windows 365? So what is Windows 365, and how does it improve on some of those scenarios?
Yeah, so Windows 365 kind of acts like a desktop as a service. So it's providing personal VDIs to users, and instead of it being the traditional sort of Windows Server 2012 R2 or 2016, 2019 now, and etc. And this is providing Windows 10, Windows 11 um, personal machines to users, and it's also in effect automatically provisioned for you by Microsoft. So it's a it's a subscription rather than a sort of you have to. It's this I'm thinking of it's rather than saying I need to spin up this this virtual machine for them. It's kind of you subscribe to a certain SKU of compute, things like that for the year or for the month or for the months, that kind of thing. So definitely brings it into a new sort of you got a user. They need a desktop. Instead of providing the hardware, they can use their own machines, their own personal machines, and then they just we'll provision them a VDI in the cloud quite simply, kind of thing.
Okay, so it's it's almost like a, I don't want to call it SaaS because it's not. It's still not SaaS because you still got to configure it right. But it takes that. Unlike AVD where you've got to provision your infrastructure, this is effectively just a like a license SKU that you buy at the right size for a user, and it just everything's handled for you automatically from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah, correct. It's like you said, it's all that the infrastructure is managed by Microsoft, so you don't have to worry about that. You're paying for effect the machine to be on for 24 hours a day, 24/7, 365. It's on all the time. So it's kind of it's very similar to AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop. Just that you're in effect paying per user per month for a machine to be available for them.
Okay, yeah. So should we move on to costs and how do you pay for it, and how what are the SKUs that are available within inside of Windows 365?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not going to be going through all of these because there are so many, because it depends on the combination you need. So they range from a compute, RAM, and storage perspective. There's various combinations from 2 virtual cores up to 8 virtual cores, and it goes from 4 GB of RAM to 32 GB RAM. And then for storage, local disk for the user, it can go from 64 to 512 gigabytes of storage, and various combinations in there. Example of pricing. So, in fact, just before we talk about pricing, there is 3 different types of licenses now. There was 2, but recently Microsoft announced a new one. So there is the Windows 365 Business, Windows 365 Enterprise, and now a new one called Windows 365 Frontline. So they have slightly different pricing between them, but for business, say a 2-core, 4 gig of RAM, 64 gig of storage, is £32 per user per month. Oh, sorry, $32 per user per month, not pounds. For enterprise, let me just double check. It's $28 per user per month in there. But it's interesting because there's more benefits actually in the enterprise one. But I'm guessing it's because of the amount of other things you have to do sort of manually, I guess. And we'll talk about the difference in a minute. So if we go to the highest one that I can see, which is 8 virtual cores, 32 gig of RAM, 512 gigabytes of storage. That is on business $162 per user per month, and it's $158 on enterprise. I haven't said anything around the frontline pricing because we don't know that yet because it's not been announced. So once we go into those, you'll kind of understand potentially what, well, not to say why, but probably guess what that pricing may or may not be.
Okay, so yeah, can you just explain the differences between business, enterprise, and frontline?
Yeah, so to business kind of ties in with all the Microsoft, business premiums, things like that. It's all designed for under 300 users. So you can't have more than 300 licenses. But what it does do is there's some limitations about what you can do with them, as you can kind of understand with some of it. So one part is that you can only Azure AD join them. And with Windows Enterprise, you can Azure AD join them. You can also connect them to a virtual network in Azure, so you can hook up to your corporate network, which then also means you can AD join them, which is quite good. Some of the other things around it is that let me just look because there's quite a few things. One of the main things is that when you with Windows 365 for Windows 365 Business is that it auto provisions the machine for you. There's no other configuration you need to do. It automatically Azure AD joins it and and then provisions it, and it's ready for the user. It doesn't give you the options around configuring it with Intune. You can do that, but it's not as flexible as Windows with the Enterprise SKU. So with the Enterprise SKU, you can use group policy or Intune for that, but of group policy if it's domain joined. Provisioning is done based on groups, so you can specify whether a user is a local admin or a local admin or a standard user, as well as where connecting it to the Azure virtual network subnet, and which, if you're not using that, you can specify which region you want it to come out of. So you can say that it comes out of the UK or the US if that's where that group of users are based. So you can specify which areas to come from. In essence, the main thing really is that it's the business side of it. The business version of it is kind of doing a lot of the sort of Windows updates, things like that, and all sort of the Intune based configuration, sort of high level for you without you being able to edit it, because it's kind of designed for getting those small businesses up and running with some security. But with Enterprise, it basically allows you to be more customizable. It puts it into Intune. You have an Intune license. You can then push multiple policies, applications to it, and do all that sort of stuff with it. So that's kind of the main sides of it. With Frontline, this is slightly different. So this is based on the functionality of Enterprise, but the licensing is slightly different. So for business and enterprise, it's a SKU per user, and each user could technically have two different SKUs, which means they would have two different Windows 365 boxes, but they'd be at different SKU levels, different compute and RAM, etc. They can't have the same one. With Frontline, it allows you to buy a single license, but it provides a virtual machine for 3 users. But only one of those users can access it at any one time. So this is kind of designed for shift work. So if you've got 3 users that kind of are on a shift and they cover different different times 24/7, this allows you to provision, in effect, pay for one machine to be powered on across 24 hours, but 3 users have their own virtual machines as they sort of work. So it's a way of potentially reducing costs rather than having 3 machines on 24/7 or paying for 3 machines all the time. Kind of thing. So it's kind of like a concurrent licensing.
Okay, so what I take from the different types is that business is obviously a little bit more simplistic to. I think they're all pretty simplistic to get started with, but
Yeah.
even more simplistic for business. And then enterprise is layering on, you know, features that the enterprise actually requires, right? Because uh, newer organizations, in 2023 that have under 300 users, the chances of them needing, Active Directory and more advanced management features, there's obviously going to be some that are going to need more than that, right? But generally, you're going to be looking at enterprises, larger organizations who have that on-prem infrastructure, right, and even potentially private infrastructure in Azure as well. you know. Um, and then Frontline is seems like a great way to be able to utilize some of that wasted compute in different hours, right? Because because you are paying just a monthly fee to have a box for that month, being able to be able to somebody, they don't jump onto the same box, do they? They all have their own
No.
separate boxes. They can just can't power them on at the same time, in theory. So that's a way to potentially reduce costs, but we don't have pricing on that SKU just yet to understand, you know, because my assumption is they're not just going to let you have 3 users share a license for free, because then it would be, you know, there's going to have to be some sort of uplift, I assume, on that.
Yeah, I mean, at a guess, and this is a guess. It might be that it's like 1.5 times a normal license to
Yeah.
cover 3 users, and you don't assign the licenses to users. So if you say you had like 100 licenses, that means potentially you could have 300 users access 100 machine. Or, 300 users could only access the machine, 100 of the machines. There's only 100 on at a time. But when you go to do the provisioning side of it, you specify that it's a frontline license, and then you can assign people to the provisioning setting, which means that they provision their machines. So it doesn't mean that it's these 3 people have to share. It's across the tenant kind of thing. So it's
Okay.
not.
Yeah.
It's as long as you've associated the provisioning profile to 300 users, those 300 users are in the pool for those
Yeah.
100 machines,
Yeah. So
and
yeah,
it's
yeah. So if you've got 300 users that you think are going to be active at one time, in theory, you could have 900 users in scope of that, couldn't you? Right.
yeah.
And as long as over those 900, as long as only 300 are booted up at any one time, but like you say, if me and you usually, let's say I follow you on my shift normally, but we happen to be working in the same shift that day, we can both boot because it's not linked to specific people at that point. It's just the pool of users that you've got.
Correct, yeah, unless all of them aren't available, because normally there'd be your one spare that the shift after me, then there wouldn't potentially be a machine for you in
Yes, true.
theory.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but yeah, and the kind of pools are based on the SKU, so you can only share against a certain SKU kind of thing. So if you've got multiple SKUs, that's the sort of groups, I guess. It's based on the
Yeah.
VM size, your provisioning.
Okay, so let me just jump back a second when we were talking about the pricing, right? Because we sort of jumped into the versions because I
Mm.
wanted to understand what features you're getting there. But I've got 2 questions. The first is the numbers that you quoted. I think it was like 100 for the more powerful one, the 8V core with 64 gig of RAM, was it? And 8V cores, 64 gig of RAM, and
832 512, yeah.
832 512. Sounds like you're specking a laptop, right? And that's effectively what you're getting, aren't you? You're getting a cloud machine, desktop, laptop, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know because let's um, invent a fictitious company that works remote. Okay, I don't know how much a laptop of that specification would cost. I assume dollar wise, it must be at least $2,000, maybe $3,000 at
Yeah,
that
probably
point.
at least, yeah.
Then you've got to get it to the person. You've got to get it set up, and then you have to. I don't know how long, because I'm not in that space. How long that laptop would last? Let's say it's 3 years. I don't know.
It's
Maybe you'd
probably
sweat
minimum of
longer.
3 years, isn't it?
You'd maybe sweat that for longer nowadays. Maybe it's four
Yeah.
years. Um, then I also don't know what the ongoing costs for supporting the actual hardware of that laptop, because the software and configuration is the same, isn't it? Because you're either managing these boxes in the cloud or you're
Hmm.
managing a laptop, right? Really, with things like Intune, right? So I don't really know, if a laptop lasts 4 years and laptop lasts 4 years, and let's say It's going to cost you $800 a year, something like that. Right, the prices that you just quoted me are more like, I don't know, $1,400, $1,500 a year, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So I suppose that's and that's really rough numbers, and I've got nothing to support, because how many hardware callouts do you get on the average laptop in an organization over a 4-year period? Must be at least one, I would have thought, maybe more, right? But
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's that,
yeah,
isn't it? But it's also, I mean, if you think about laptops, there's potential of it being dropped, it
accidental
going
damage, maybe
missing,
that's the
it
highest. Yeah,
it
yeah,
going, if especially if your remote users are quite far away as well, and getting it over there, the cost of providing new hardware, providing that
yeah.
support, is it support in that country? Does it have to come back to be supported? There's all those questions as well.
Yeah, well, for instance, I won't name any specific products or companies, but I know of somebody that had to ship a laptop to another country that cost over $100 to send it there. It took 6 weeks to arrive because of various custom things. You thought it was lost at one point. Who knows? Um, and the also double damaging part of that is the brand of that laptop that there is no retail presence in that country either. So even to get support, the laptop would have to come back to base before it got repaired or whatnot, because where that user was located. So in that environment, that laptop, and this is a bit of a niche scenario because this isn't like it wasn't being sent to like the UK or the US, where there's lots of retail support and all of that sort of stuff. But in that scenario, the risk of that hardware was so high because if the laptop didn't turn on one day, then you were potentially a month or 2 months from resolution of that, or it's another
Mm.
laptop waiting to be sent out. So there is a business continuity aspect of it as well for remote workers, especially. Um, so, and I'm obviously going to pick an extreme example of what I've seen, right? Um, and that's forgetting about, like you say, theft, loss, accidental damage. All of those things were human.
Well,
That happens in the real
well,
world, right?
it might be that because if it takes 6 weeks to go to those users, it might be you buy, if it's a team, you might buy a couple of spares just to sit there
Yep, and that's what they
just
had.
in case. But
Yep,
then you've got to patch those. They've got to be turned on at some point to be updated potentially, or I guess they're autopiloted, then
yeah,
it's probably not
yes.
so bad. But yeah,
Okay, so we, our very quick maths, we may pay a bit more, but we maybe get reduced risk and things like that. But the users have to dial in on some machines anyway.
yeah.
So what types of machines are we looking at for those users? Let's make the worst example of we're not going to make people use their own machines for it. Maybe it's an employee that you don't want. Maybe they don't have any other device that they're
So
willing to use. What would we do in that scenario?
So depending on what they're sort of doing, so it could just be in effect a thin terminal, thin PC machine that is very high level. It could be something an app a laptop that's bought locally by the user, maybe for the organization expensed. That's cheap, cheaper than it would be if they bought the hardware sort of thing. Um, the like I said, depending on what they're doing, potentially it could just be an iPad. It could be a Chromebook because Windows 365, like AVD, you can access it from any device anywhere, kind of thing. So there's potentially, because the new iPads, things like that. I think you can hook them up to monitors and have a keyboard and mouse, Bluetooth keyboard and mouse attached to it. We got someone that where we work where that's what they take to the office now with Windows 365 instead of taking their large laptop. Um, there's that potential. It could be an Android. Potentially, it could even be like an Android phone or an iPhone, maybe, if it could do the attached screen, to make it into full screen thing. the the reason why I say it depends what they do is some of the redirection for Teams audio and things like that isn't quite there yet for other endpoints apart from Macs and Windows to that redirection of the video and stuff. So it's a better experience. But then I suppose you could say they could just use the app on the iPad to access Teams. Depends on the organization requirements and restrictions. Because I suppose that iPad could still be managed.
Yeah, I was the sort of point I was just thinking about is if they did go down to their local like electronics store and buy a laptop, do we care that that laptop is, you know, not patched and potentially not patched and the vulnerabilities on it, or do we just enforce a minimum, client version that they have to connect with? How do we then secure that machine?
There's a couple of things. I mean, it's always the risk with bring your own of what the endpoint is, but you're doing multi-factor authentication to connect to Windows 365. You can also limit the what they can copy and paste and things like that, and what they can screen grab potentially. So providing your endpoint that you're connecting to is secure and that your identity is secure, then I don't really see I see definitely a reduced risk in what the endpoint is. I mean,
Okay, yeah,
because you're securing the access, you know that it's them because you're doing MFA and you're doing other checks like the location, things like that, using conditional access. And then when you're jumping onto the machine itself, you're stopping any copy paste, any potentially screen grab and things like that. So
yeah,
then they can't exfiltrate data that way. And then if you've got Defend for Endpoint on there and Endpoint DLP, all Microsoft technologies on there, then you're protecting it that way. The endpoint, the Windows 365 endpoint, and as well, if you've got the Azure virtual network connection, it might be going through the corporate firewall.
yeah.
So again, exactly what's happening, sort of thing. So
So sorry for that question. I think then just bring your own principles then apply, isn't it?
yeah,
Right. If you are going down this rule, the headline is yeah, bring your own at this point. And the best practice around that is then what kicks in, which is okay. And that's a well established pattern anyway, isn't it? What I've discussed. That's not just a Windows 365 or ABD topic
no,
then, is it? Right, that's just bring your own, like, you know that's like saying, can everybody have email on their phones, you know right? And so okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that was a great, thank you for answering those questions, Alan, because there's a wide range in use case. There can be some complexities in determining like what the best solution is and what fits where, and how it all fits together. So I suppose that leads me on to my next question: is like, how easy is it to set up?
so we kind of talked about this a little bit. So for business, it's kind of assign a license to the user, and hey, there's a virtual machine ready for them in 20 minutes, kind of thing. They access it. They go to the Windows 365 app. They can download from the store, and they can see their machine, or it'll tell them it's being provisioned, and then they log on to it, and then they got their machine. Um, from an enterprise and frontline scenario, um, generally the same. It's just there's a bit more configuration within Intune. Ignoring configuration because that is obviously extra to do more security things like that. But you might already be doing that for your current Windows 10, Windows 11 devices. So it's just kind of like they act as in effect one of those machines. There may just be some additional configuration you might want to do because of remote desktoping or the VDI sort of solution. You maybe want to for at least the front line side of things, you might want to say that if they're inactive for 5 minutes, you disconnect them so that it helps with the whole switching machines for users kind of thing. Or there might be some other stuff that you might want to do some optimization maybe to get more out of the compute. Maybe you don't want to spec it as high, but you might want to turn some services off that don't make no sense on a virtual desktop kind of thing. But yeah, all you've got to do is really set up the provisioning profile within Intune. There's its own section within Intune once you've got the licensing applied. Um, that allows you to specify where they're connected to the network, what image you want to use, because you can use custom images if you want to build your own for it, if that's a requirement, or use the templates from Microsoft, the Windows 11 with Office 365 or pre-installed. Um, and then there's just the user settings, which is in effect just saying whether the user is a standard user or an admin user on that device. Once that's configured and assigned to a group, and then users are put in that group, it then starts automatic provisioning. So it's relatively simple to configure, and then it in effect kind of acts like Azure Veg Desktop at that point. Yeah, the same sort of experience in some sense.
Yeah, so just we won't talk about it a lot, but difference between this and Azure Virtual Desktop is effectively you don't have to build that infrastructure in Azure.
Yeah, it's kind of the way it's kind of seen is that Windows 365 is kind of this is these are the SKUs and this is what you get, which is great for quite a lot of scenarios. This is predefined for you. You don't have to think about it. They're one-to-one machines. They're on 24/7, and there's not too much wriggle room with them. This is what you get. And I'm not saying that in a bad sort of way, because potentially that is all you want. You just want, it's like buying a laptop. You generally in organizations, well, in larger organizations at least, you will normally agree a laptop model for a persona and go, right, we're going to buy 1,000 of these, hundreds of thousands of these machines. This is going to be our supported one, kind of thing. It's never there are edge cases where it's like one-offs and things like that, but generally there's four types of machines within an organization that are going to be supported. So it's kind of similar, but with AVD it kind of allows you to do anything you want. If you want different SKUs, if you want multiple pools to access, use to access different pools for different scenarios, then they can. Windows 365 is kind of a one-to-one. AVD allows you to have multiple users on a single machine using the multi-session. And again, there's pros and cons to that. There's pros and cons to Windows 365 kind of thing, because you might have users that they all do the same. The same. They're all the same persona, but in Windows 365, you might have to provision 200 virtual machines for them and manage 200 at that point. And when I say manage, it's more of the operational side of things. Make sure they're patched. When there's vulnerability, you've got to patch 200 machines, kind of thing. That sort of scenario, which those in that's still something that you'd still have to do for that user if they had a laptop. So it's not, let's say, extra work. But in AVD, that might only be 15 hosts for you to manage. But then there's the other caveat is that you got X users on a host that could take them out that way. So there's slightly more risk in users and stuff like that. But there's pros and cons both sides to it. It's just working out whether it meets your use cases. I think definitely.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. So what I've seen recently is lots of new features and changes coming out for Windows 365. So is there anything coming up soon that's exciting that people need to know about if they're considering Windows 365?
Yeah, so obviously the latest announcement about frontline licenses, that's definitely something to watch and to see whether it helps with your use cases, kind of thing. If you've got shift workers, or there may be other scenarios. Just to sort of mention that you don't have to have frontline licenses. It can be E3s, E5s scenarios. It's just called. I think it's really called frontline because it's kind of matching with that shift work sort of pattern kind of things. But maybe there's potential that maybe you've got a little bit of overlap, and you maybe might be able to save a little bit of money on licensing because you can, maybe you've got 200 users that are in most of the time. Maybe there's a small amount that work overnight. You might be able to get away with maybe that frontline licensing to sort of help you reduce some cost.
Can I
Um,
just ask a quick question about licensing? So we should approach this in the fact that paying for Windows 365, we're not actually getting a Windows license, are we? We're just getting a box
yeah,
that we
so
then
you have
license
to.
on top like normal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you have to. So for enterprise, you have to have a Windows license, Windows Enterprise license, so Windows E3 or Windows E5. For business, you don't, but I think that's why it's slightly more expensive because you're paying for that license monthly, basically.
So sorry, you could have a like a lower business SKU that doesn't include Windows
So,
on the
well,
business one.
the business licenses don't. There's not a prereq for Windows Enterprise
Okay.
to have it as a subscription. Um, and I think you in effect pay more because I think when I did it, I think there was like £3 or £4 a month more the business SKUs than the
Right.
enterprise. But they're slightly cheaper the enterprise ones, but then you got to have the prereq licensing.
Yeah.
So I think so. Um, but yeah.
Okay.
So the other thing is there's a new app coming, and it's been talked about for quite some time now. So I'm hoping it's coming out soon because I really want it. Um, but it's the Windows 365 Switch app, and it's been talked about. And in effect, what it allows you to do is at the moment, you download the Windows 365 app, you click on your your machine, you connect to it, you do your MFA, etc., and then you connect to that machine, and it's full desktop, and then you just use it. With Windows 365 Switch, the concept or the vision of it, and it's been seen sort of or potentially working, it's been announced quite some time, is that the features in Windows 10 and 11 is that you can have multiple desktops and that you can switch between them. So maybe you've got like your Outlook stuff in one desktop, and then you can switch it over to like your development. So have all your development windows up. This in effect allows you to sort of switch over to your 365 desktop just by in effect swiping or switching desktop, and it just looks like you then just jumped onto it. So if you've got like two personas, and maybe you're doing like stuff like, or you're using your personal machine, then you need to go to work, you just in effect swipe to the right once it's connected and MFA'd, and then you're just on. And then when it's lunchtime or whatever, I guess you can then switch over back to your personal and do browse the internet for your lunch. So I think that's really really good. The the other part to that, and kind of tied in, is that they're bringing in so that you can directly boot into Windows 365. So you power on your machine, it does some authentication somewhere. I don't know how. I've not seen it yet. And then you just log in like you would normally to your machine. Username, password, or passwordless if you're using other things. Um, and then you're into your virtual machine, and you potentially wouldn't even know that you're connected. Just connects. So I think that's a great experience, and maybe that's where like the thin terminals and thin PCs and stuff are going to be really powerful because you're not even going to know that you jumped into your machine.
Yeah, exactly. And those machines can become sort of dedicated Windows 365
Mm.
boxes then at that point, right? So yeah, definitely that sounds really powerful.
Yeah, there was some talk, and again, I've not looked into it too much, but there was talk about them being able to synchronize with the local Windows as well, so that it was able to work out if you got disconnected, you could still use your local machine. I
Right,
don't.
okay.
It's I say again, I've not seen a lot of it. I've just seen the chat, the chatter about it, kind of thing. So definitely seems interesting. And the other sort of feature to talk about is kind of what I said around the Microsoft Teams media redirection. So this has always been a thing with remote desktop and VDIs is you don't want your audio and stuff to run on those virtual machines because you're basically using the compute to manage it. This is in effect redirect to the local machine, and your Teams message or your Teams video and audio is coming from your local machine and then going to Microsoft Teams directly, but it's linked to your remote desktop session, and it kind of like um, places the video, even though it's local, but on the stream from the remote desktop. So kind of like it's weird. It kind of like pictures on picture it sort of thing
Okay.
for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that just reduces the load on the machines, and Azure Veg Desktop's got that as well um, as a feature. So
Just thinking, you talking about load, you don't pay bandwidth for this, do you? For Windows 365, like you would with AVD?
so you you don't for connecting to it, and if you've just used Microsoft Managed Networking, then you don't. It's all included. But if you hook it up to a VNet in your Azure infrastructure, then the outbound of it will go via that Azure, and you'll pay for it that way.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you need to go via a firewall, or you want to connect to the internal side of things, then you'll run through the networking there, and you'll pay for that. Even if your egress point is on premise, it's the egress point. You'll be charged for the egress out of through the VPN to on premise
Yeah.
still.
But if you wanted to treat them, even if they were like managed by you, and you wanted to keep them out, quotes, on the internet, you could always VPN them back in if you've got that solution as well, right?
Yeah,
You
I
know,
don't see why not. Yeah, that's potentially as well. Yeah.
if you wanted to keep
Um,
them like completely segregated, I'm not sure why you would do that, because if you could just hook it to your VNet, you'd probably just hook them straight in. But if you did want to keep them or into a separate VNet for themselves, a separate subnet for themselves, and then peer that in somehow. But I'm just thinking, because at the end of the day, it's just a box, isn't it? It's no different than a laptop, really, if that
correct.
makes
Yeah.
sense, right? So you could have them VPN into another place in Azure, if that makes sense, if you wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. For like the Azure AD joined, or sorry, the Active Directory joined, then you would have to have the VNet in.
Yeah,
And like you
exactly. Yeah,
said, to be honest, it might be cheaper to have it connect to the VNet, because your domain controllers and stuff on all your infrastructure might be in Azure. It's only when your internet outbound that you'll pay for. Then it
yeah,
depends
exactly.
where
Yeah,
your data is.
yeah,
Um, and what else am I thinking of? Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, because you can only do AD joined over the VNet side of things.
okay, cool. Sounds good. Any other points or anything, Alan, that you want to go over? Anything you think you've missed, or
The the only things I'd say is, and I think we need to do an episode on it, is not necessarily AVD versus Windows 365, but kind of highlighting the differences between them and where you'd use each one. I know we kind of talked about, we've done an AVD one, um, but we've also done just done this one. But I think we need to do that comparison in an episode, 'cause I think there's definitely pros and cons. Um, and for licensing perspective, you have to consider that if you're in an EA agreement, and potentially you're trying to get a discount by purchasing X amount on that EA agreement on your renewal, you just need to consider that you've kind of got to agree what SKU you want. So you've got to have that understanding, that business analysis of what machines you need to use and that sort of stuff. But that's kind of the good thing about it, is that initially you could do pay as you go, try them out, see if they work. If they don't, get rid of them, deprovision them, cancel the licensing, get the next SKUs that you need. Where with your on premise, you've paid for that compute, so you've got to try and make everything fit. Or like we said, you might over provision, and then your per machine might cost more,
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you very much for that, Alan. That's been a great overview.
Cool. So what's the next episode then, Sam?
Yeah, so next episode is going to be me talking about Azure DevOps. It's a platform that we use quite heavily to manage our projects, code, and um, I'm going to cover the whole of DevOps, but probably the main sort of area that we utilize is Azure DevOps pipelines, which is a CI/CD environment for deploying your um, deploying your it's not just code and infrastructure, and many other different things that you might want to automate in pipelines. Um, so I will be covering, the overview of Azure DevOps. We'll probably do more in depth episodes on each section, maybe in the next season, and then really get into some nitty gritty of each area. But I'm gonna because I think there's a lot of because of the naming. I think there's a lot of confusion about what is actually included in DevOps. Because when you hear the words Azure DevOps, you think it's very DevOps focused, when actually it's a bunch of different tooling that is in one place. So yeah, so I'm going to take everybody through that.
Cool.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many more topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
We also have the ability for you to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Do you disagree with some of my thoughts? Or are there anything that I've missed? Please use the contact form in the show notes, or you can leave us a voice message on our website in the bottom right corner. So we'd love to hear from you. Maybe some ideas or some suggestions for next season's episodes would be good.
Yeah, only a couple of episodes left. Getting very close now, so yeah, really exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Alan. Catch you all on the next one.
Yeah, cheers everyone. Speak to you next week. Bye.